Let me ask you something. How exactly does a species with no fur, no claws, and no natural resistance to cold survive 20,000 years trapped in an ice age? By every reasonable measure, humans shouldn't have made it. We're not built for it, biologically. And yet we did, not just survive, but spread across an entire frozen planet, while other, better adapted species went extinct around us. The reason has almost nothing to do with strength, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what got us through, and why the third factor is the one that actually explains the other two. Here's where most people's understanding stops. They picture cavemen in animal skins, shivering by a fire, barely scraping by. That image isn't wrong exactly. It's just radically incomplete, because researchers studying Ice Age remains found something that should genuinely surprise you. Skeletons from this period show individuals who survived catastrophic injuries, broken limbs that healed, missing eyes, severe infections, injuries that would have made someone completely unable to hunt or gather for months, sometimes years. In a world where the only rule was supposedly survival of the fittest, why were the weakest members of these groups still alive decades later? That's suspect number one, and it points directly at something researchers hadn't fully appreciated. There are three specific advantages that got humans through the Ice Age, and the third one is the part that makes the first two feel like a warm-up. The first advantage wasn't physical, it was social. And it's the direct answer to that injured skeleton question. Those individuals survived because someone fed them, protected them, and kept them warm while they recovered for months, sometimes years, with zero expectation of an immediate return on that investment. That's not something most animal species do at scale. Other predators, better armed, faster, stronger, generally abandon injured members to fend for themselves. Ice Age humans didn't. Groups that carried their wounded, statistically, appear to have outlasted groups that didn't, and that single behavioral difference may have mattered more for long-term survival than any physical adaptation ever could. The second advantage is something almost every survival documentary gets slightly wrong. It wasn't about being tough enough to endure the cold directly. It was about technology compensating for a body that was never built for it. Ice Age humans developed genuinely sophisticated tailored clothing, not just draped furs, but fitted, layered garments sewn together using bone needles found at multiple sites, designed specifically to trap body heat the way modern insulated jackets do. They built semi-permanent shelters using mammoth bones as structural framing when wood was scarce, some large enough to house extended family groups through entire winters. And controlled fire wasn't just for warmth. It extended usable daylight, allowed for cooking that made previously indigestible food sources viable, and created a communal space that anchored the exact social bonds, keeping injured members alive. None of this required superhuman biology. It required transmitted knowledge, technique passed from one generation to the next, refined slightly each time. Now here's the third advantage. The one that makes the first two feel like a warm-up, because it's not about any single skill at all. It's about range. Ice Age humans weren't specialists. A saber-toothed cat needed large prey to survive, and when that prey population collapsed, so did the cat. Ice Age humans ate large game when it was available, but they also ate small game, fish, shellfish, roots, nuts, insects, whatever the local environment offered in whatever season they found themselves in. That flexibility meant no single ecological collapse could wipe out an entire group's food source simultaneously. When mammoth populations crashed in certain regions, groups that had also been eating fish and foraging survived the transition. Groups that had specialized too heavily didn't have that same margin. Here's the part that connects all three advantages back to that opening question: why a furless, clawless species made it through an ice age that killed off far better physically adapted animals. It wasn't any one of these three things working alone. It was the way they reinforced each other. The social bonds meant injured, experienced individuals survived long enough to pass down knowledge instead of dying and taking that knowledge with them. That transmitted knowledge produced the clothing and shelter technology that compensated for what human bodies physically lacked. and the dietary flexibility meant no single environmental shock could break the entire system at once. Remove any one piece, and the whole survival strategy becomes significantly more fragile. This is genuinely different from how most species handle extreme environments. Most adapt physically over enormous timescales: thicker fur, more fat reserves, smaller extremities to conserve heat, the way woolly mammoths and Arctic foxes did. Humans barely changed biologically at all during this period. Instead, we adapted the environment around us and adapted our behavior toward each other, which turned out to be a fundamentally more flexible strategy than physical evolution alone, because it could happen within a single generation instead of requiring thousands of years of genetic drift. So knowing all three of these forces, care for the injured, transmitted technological knowledge, and dietary flexibility, what does Ice Age survival actually reveal about that era? Once you strip away the shivering caveman image, groups small enough to know every member personally, but organized enough to divide labor, care for dependents, and maintain shelters and fire through months of darkness and brutal cold. Individuals who specialized in different skills, tool-making, hunting, tracking, and shared the results collectively, rather than everyone fending entirely for themselves. This wasn't a brutal, every person for themselves existence. In several measurable ways, it required more cooperation and more sustained social investment than most people manage in modern life. So go back to the question at the start of this video. How does a species this physically unequipped survive an ice age that wiped out far tougher animals? It was never really about the cold at all. It was about a species that figured out, tens of thousands of years before writing existed, that keeping the weak alive, passing down what you know, and never betting everything on one food source was a more powerful survival strategy than raw strength ever could be. You now know something most people never learn, even after a full education. The Ice Age wasn't survived by the strongest individuals. It was survived by the groups that refused to leave anyone behind. If this changed how you think about human survival, hit subscribe, because next week's video breaks down how ancient humans navigated across entire oceans thousands of years before anyone invented a compass.